Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm putting up a 30 by 72 foot high tunnel from Zimmerman's High Tunnels. The one I'm putting up has 5-foot sidewalls and just a straight truss in the arch, and I'm doing the wooden end walls on it, and it's got 3 rows of purlins with 6-foot spacing on the arches. So there's a lot of variations of these high tunnels, so if yours is different than this one, some of the measurements are going to be different also. So now we're ready to put on our baseboards and hip boards. I'm going to put my hip board on first because some of these posts, if they're not perfectly level from side to side, it's a lot easier to adjust before your baseboard is on. So I'm going to put my hip board on first and get everything level and lined up that way. Now, between the top of your baseboard and the bottom of the hip board, we want the measurement to be between 48 and 50 inches. So the bottom of my baseboard I'm going to put level with the ground, which when I marked my posts to pound them in at 4 foot 4 inches from the top, that mark is still there, and I'm going to go with that. That's going to be the bottom of my baseboard. So from that mark, I'm going to measure up the 62 inches. Now, to explain the 62-inch measurement a little better, first from the mark that's level with the ground, where you pound that in, the 4 foot 4 inch mark, your baseboard, which is a 2x6, is going to be 5.5 inches. Okay, so that's 5.5 inches, and I'm going 49 inches between the baseboard and hip board. Then your hip board is a 2x8, and that ends up being 7.5 inches. So when you add all those measurements together, from the bottom of the baseboard to the top of the hip board, it's going to be 62 inches. So I'm going to mark the 2 end posts and the 7th post, or the center post, at 62 inches. Then I'm going to take a string and put it 1/4 inch above my marks across the whole side of the hoop house. That way I can just put the hip board just under the string and keep everything level across the top. So once you have your string up, you want to sight down it and make sure it's nice and level to see that your measurements all came out right. And then we are ready to put up our first hip board. And we're going to start with a 13-foot hip board. So the first hip board is going to be 13 feet, which will make the splice of the board a foot past the post. The following hip boards are going to be 12 feet, which will continue making the splices a foot past each post. Then to splice the boards, I'm just going to use a piece of one of the hip boards, about a 1 foot piece, and use 3-inch wood screws to hold it together. There's several other ways you can do it. You can get the plates for nailing trusses together, the steel plates that you pound on. Anything that'll hold it'll work. But I'm going to use wood and wood screws. Now the first step to putting on your hip boards, on the outside edges, we want to make the boards flush with the outside edge of the arch or the post. Then we're going to drill a 3/8 inch hole through the board and the post, and we're going to put the 4.5 inch by 3/8 carriage bolts through those to hold those, and also a nut and a washer on the back side. Now when you're drilling the holes, if you're having trouble getting through the posts, it does help to drill a pilot hole or a smaller hole first. Once we get the 2 bolts on and holding the board here, we are going to start putting the clamps with the lag bolts on the rest of them down the row. First, before we put the clamps on, we want to check to make sure all the posts are level, and if they aren't, then I use a ratchet strap to adjust them a little bit. So if your board is the proper height from the string, then we can put the clamps on. After you have the clamps on, we're going to put a Tech screw through one of these holes in the clamps to keep it from sliding up and down on the pipe. So you just have to put a Tech screw in one of the clamps, but you want to remember to do it on each post and on the top and bottom boards. So now I'm going to put my splice together. And remember to get screws that are designed for treated lumber or decks. Then, to make it a little easier, I just screw a little piece on the bottom here. Then you can just set your next board right on this piece and against the back that you already screwed on. And we'll put 2 more screws in this side. You'll have 4 screws from the back side and 4 screws from the front side. And then you've made your first splice. Then we can continue putting the clamps on and making splices until we get to the other end. So when you get to the far side, once again, you just measure and cut your board off so it's flush with the outside of the last post. And we're going to put the 2 more carriage bolts in, and you will have one side of the hip boards up. Now the baseboards are going to be put on similar to the hip boards, only you're going to be using a 2x6 instead of a 2x8. The first one, like the hip boards, we're going to start with a 13-foot 2x6. Now I'm going to measure 49 inches from the bottom of the hip board. You can put them at 50 inches or 48 inches. Either way is fine. I'm going right in between. I'm putting my baseboard slightly in the ground. That does help with keeping rodents out of your greenhouse. Or if you have your posts marked, you can go 5.5 inches up from the mark that you have where you pounded them into. And then I'm going to take my string again on the 2 end posts and the middle or 7th post and put it 1/4 inch above the line, and then I'm going to run my baseboards 1/4 inch under the string. So to start with, we're going to put 2 bolts in again, and we're going to be splicing it with a 1-foot piece of 2x6. Once again, we're going to put 2 clamps on the baseboards, and in one of the clamps we want to put a Tech screw so that it doesn't slide up and down. And then we can put our baseboards on. So we're going to finish the baseboard the same as the hip board. We're going to make it flush with the end and put 2 of the carriage bolts in it. Then we're going to take a 2x4 and cut it off at 49 inches. And we're going to put that on here. And just keep it flush with the top and the bottom edges. And then we're going to put 2 bolts, the 4.5 inch carriage bolts, to hold this on also. And when you're finished, the side should look like this. And now that we have these 2x4s on both ends of the hoop house, the boards are done for this side. And we just want to do the same on the other side. Once we have the lumber on both sides of the hoop house, we're going to move up and put on the side 2 rows of purlins in the arches. And we're going to put those on the same way that we put the center or peak purlin on. If you put the purlin ends on both sides, you're going to have to take one of the sides off to get it put together when you get to the end. Now that we have all the purlins in, we're ready to put in our roof bracing. So before we install it, we want to make sure our end walls are level. So I used a plumb bob, or a chalk line in this case. So what I did was I ran a string from the outsides of the two end wall posts, and then the plumb bob I hung from the peak of the arch. You want to make sure it's not a windy day when you do this. And as you can see, it's a little bit off to the right, about an inch. So then what I did is I hooked some ratchet straps up down to the fourth post so that it's out of the way of your roof bracing. And I'm just going to tighten that up a little bit until my arches are all level. So to install the corner bracing, we're going to start with putting it in the peak of the outside arch and bring it down to this one. And I'm going to put a bolt in right here, and then I'm going to tighten both of them up and put another clamp on this side of the purlin down to the third arch. If you have your purlins in a different position, you can put the clamps right next to each other. In this case, I'm going on each side of the purlin. So now I have both of the braces on and the clamps tightened. One thing to remember when you're putting the clamps on, you want to make sure you have the bolts pointing downwards so they don't snag your plastic. Then to finish this side, we want to put a Tek screw in each of the clamps so that they don't slide. And then this side will be finished, and we just do likewise on the other three sides. And when you're finished with the roof bracing, it should look like this. It'll be kind of like a V. Also, you want to remember to put Tek screws in all of the clamps to keep them all in place. Next, I'm going to finish putting the C-channel on the outside arches. So first I'm just going to bend it just a little to make it fit the arch. Then we'll make a sharper bend where it goes over the board. And then we can make a mark about 1 inch down, and we will cut it off there. And then we're going to screw it on. Once again, keep the sides and edges nice and tight and flush so that nothing gets snagged or the plastic doesn't get cut. So to hold the bottom of the C-channel, we're going to use a wood screw. And then this piece is on, and we can put the other three pieces on, and then the arches will be done. Then we're going to continue and put the C-channel along the boards. So to put the C-channel on the side walls, we just want to run it about 1 inch below the top. And we're going to put our wood screws in, 1.5 inch wood screws, about every foot. And we can continue putting pieces end to end all the way across. It does help if you have a clamp to hold it while you put the screws in. when you get to the end, you want to cut it off once again about 1 inch from the end of the hip board, and then that side will be finished.